So this is we'll outline a whole center section of the book of Isaiah. We're still in the consolation of the Gentiles this morning. We should finish up this section today. That's my goal. Promises of redemption. So this morning we're finishing up this section on the consolation of the Gentiles, and this is called a new song. Verses 10 through 17, and it'll be pretty obvious why we call it that in just a couple minutes. This is a call for praise from the world, from the Gentiles, from all the world, in response to what the servant is going to do. Remember, the servant is going to bring, specifically in this first servant song, his work is justice. He's going to bring justice, and that word justice means more than just the right decision from the bench. Justice means and includes the truth about who God is, the truth about what God has said, takes into account all of the creation narrative, all of the truth about what God has told us about the world. When the servant brings all of this to the world, the response is going to be quite stunning. The Gentiles, it told us at the end of the tailpiece of the servant song, the Gentiles are going to put their hope in what the servant will say, in the justice he will bring. So this is an end times kind of thing that the servant is going to do. It pictures the time when all the world responds to the Savior, the good news of the Savior. So this song this morning is a call for praise in response to that work. Themes that are continued. You know, you've got the song, verses 1 through 4, and then the tailpiece in 5 through 9. Things that are continued from those verses include the word earth, islands, and the world's inhabitants. So the themes remain the same. So we know that these two passages are tied together. This new song is tied to the work of the servant in those first 9 verses. And the Lord's controversy with the idol gods continues. Idolatry continues as a problem all through the Old Testament. It is especially a problem when you compare the servant with the idol gods. You have a living servant who brings justice, and you have an idol god who has to be nailed down so he doesn't fall over. Which one are you going to choose? So here's the outline of these verses 10 through 17. The first verses 10, 11, and 12 are a summons to song. That's the choir leader standing up and getting everybody to stand up and say, you know, are you ready to sing? And, then verse 13, you have the mighty Lord. That corresponds at the end of the outline to the fallen idols and idolaters. So you have a powerful Lord, and you have idols who are just fallen over. That's the corresponding items in the outline. Do you see what I'm saying here? So then we have divine silence in 14a and b, and that's matched in the outline by divine commitment. And then we have illustrations. The illustrations include pregnancy and devastation and leadership, and we're going to find out that these are all in the Lord's first person speech. So these are going to be illustrations of God at work in the world. So this section is going to serve as the climax, the end of the section dealing with the comfort of the Gentile world. Remember, these first 2 chapters, first 3 chapters actually, 40, 41, and 42, are a response to the notion that Isaiah has told Hezekiah that his descendants are going to go into captivity in Babylon. And the very next words that the scripture records, the very first words of the next chapter, are comfort ye my people. Isaiah says in chapter 39, you're going to go into captivity because of what you've done. And the very next words, the answer, the response, the very response of God to the fact that Isaiah has said to Hezekiah, your people are going into captivity. The very next words are addressed to those people in captivity. There's nothing in between. There's no intermediate something. When God sees his people in captivity, his response is immediate. And he says, comfort ye my people. And you've got chapters that are comfort to the Jews and then comfort to the Gentiles. They're going into captivity because of their sin, but they're going into captivity for redemptive purposes. They're not going into captivity because God's done with them, because God's going to put an end to them, because God's going to end his relationship with them. They're going into captivity in order that they might be redeemed, in order that God can rescue them. And so we need to try to keep that in our minds, because as the picture is painted here, there's a lot of painting of difficult times in Babylon. And it is going to be difficult. And if you'll permit me, I can tell you why it's going to be difficult. I can tell you it's because I'm hard-headed, because I'm slow to learn, because when God starts to talk to me, I don't immediately sit up and say, oh, okay, God, I get it. What happens is God thumps me and I say, well, I can deal with that. And then God thumps me again and I say, well, maybe I should pay attention. Maybe I should figure out what to do about this. And then God thumps me again so that I'll say, Lord, maybe I should listen to what you have to say about this. And then he thumps me again to tell me what. The reason redemption is hard is because I'm slow to learn. I'm stiff-necked. I'm hard-headed. I am. It's my nature. I was born that way. I'm a fallen creature. I'm not going to respond quickly and easily. I don't learn easily. I have to be shepherded, if you will. So
you're saying the Israeli people were not unique?
Yeah, I'd like to say, they were a hard-necked people, stiff-headed people. Yeah. Too bad they weren't more like us.
Yeah.
But
and they've really been wrong.
So this section is going to deal with that climax of comfort, and especially to the Gentiles. And we want to notice here that these verses 14 through 16, this center section, is the Lord's first person speech. This is the Lord himself speaking in the middle of this outline. Whenever the Lord speaks, maybe it's time to sit up and pay attention. And so that's why it's at the center of the outline. Isaiah thinks we ought to pay attention when the Lord speaks. So, summons to sing, verses 10, 11, and 12. Sing to the Lord a new song, his praise from the end of the earth. Did you hear the new song in Revelation 5 yesterday? His praise from the end of the earth. You who go down to the sea and all that fills it, the coastlands and their inhabitants. Let the desert and its cities lift up their voice. The villages that Kedar inhabits. Let the inhabitants of Sela sing for joy. Let them shout from the top of the mountains. Let them give glory to the Lord and declare his praise in the coastlands. So remember, the servant was going to do his work in the earth, in the coastlands, in the sea, all of those places. Well, we've got earth, we've got coastlands, inhabitants, we've got the mountains, we've got the coastlands. The whole theme continues into this section. So it's the whole world that's called to sing this new song. In Scripture, whenever it calls for a new song, it is always in response to a new realization, a new understanding on the part of human beings, or a response to something new that God has done. Do you remember it says in the servant song that God is going to do a new thing? Remember that part in verse 9? We're called to sing a new song because God is going to do a new thing. The new thing is the work of the servant. When the servant comes and he brings justice to the world, when God's word comes and lives sinless life and dies on a cross in my place and is resurrected to life, I ought to sing a new song, had I not. When he comes and brings justice to the world, I ought to sing a new song, had I not. This is the appropriate response. This is what mankind ought to do in response to the fact that a servant is coming. This work that God's going to do through the servant, we've only begun to see it. We've only seen the first of the 4 servant songs, but already we should understand that this work, this thing that God's going to do, will call for a new song. Remember, I've said it over and over again that all of the prophets point to this thing that God's going to do somewhere out there in the future. Now, it's hard for you and I, with our 21st century minds, to put ourselves in the Old Testament, to put ourselves in a place that's 800 years before Jesus is born. 800 years before he's born, we don't know his name. 800 years before he's born, we don't know he's going to die on a cross. 800 years before he's born, we don't know all these things. All the prophet is saying is, if you want salvation, if you want to recover from this thing that happened to you in Genesis chapter 3, I think we have to go back to Genesis, guys. If you want to know what's important, you really have to understand that God's going to do something out here that you can't do. All of the sacrifices that you make under the law are for today's sin. None of those sacrifices is going to save you ultimately. All of what the law does is instruction so that you will know how to live in a way that God can live in your midst with you, so that the tabernacle can be among God's people, so that the temple can be with God's people. If you want salvation, all of the prophets said, God's going to do that out there in the future. This something that God's going to do out there in the future is what all of the prophets point to. And Isaiah is going to tell us in 4 little songs, he's going to tell us an awful lot about what that thing is that God's going to do out there. You know, we listened yesterday in Revelation about the lion from the tribe of Judah. Where did we get the lion from the tribe of Judah? The lion from the tribe of Judah is introduced to us in Genesis chapter 49. It says the lion of the tribe of Judah and the root of Jesse. Well, where did we get the root of Jesse that's talked about in the book of Revelation? How does this person in the book of Revelation, how is he equated with the lion of the tribe of Judah and the root of Jesse? Well, the root of Jesse is in Isaiah chapter 11. Look at the first couple of verses of Isaiah chapter 11. All of these Old Testament prophets, all of them, all of prophecy, all that God told Israel, all that God gives us in the Old Testament, all of it points to this one thing that God's going to do. That one thing we're going to learn is Jesus on the cross dying for our sin. That's the only salvation that exists. From the beginning of the world, it has been God's plan. From eternity, from time past, it has been God's plan. And all of the Old Testament points to that moment, as all of the New Testament points to that moment. When Jesus died on that cross, that's the center of all that's important. There is nothing that mankind needs to know that's more important than what happened at that cross. Nothing. So the Old Testament is not something we can jettison because Jesus fell out of heaven suddenly and came down to earth. That's been God's plan all along. And if you were an Old Testament person, if you lived on the earth as an Old Testament person, did God provide a way for you to have salvation? The answer to that question is yes. What he provided was Jesus on the cross. And all of the Old Testament asks you to believe in that thing that God's going to do, rather than trusting in anything that you can do. Your sacrifices under the law, your obedience to God, all of that will get you through today, but it won't get you into heaven. What you need is for God to do something, because you are just like Adam and Eve. There's nothing you can do to get saved. If you lived 800 years before Jesus was born, you are just like you and me, guys. You can't get to heaven because of something you can do. You can only get there because of what Jesus did on that cross. And so Old Testament people, God's creatures, the ones he created and put on the earth before Jesus came, had to be pointed to that cross. And that's specifically what the Old Testament does, is it points over and over again to this thing that God's going to do. If you don't believe in that, it doesn't matter when you lived on the earth, doesn't matter who you were, whether you were Abraham's first child or one that's born today. It doesn't matter unless you believe in Jesus, unless you believe in that thing that God has done for us. You cannot get to heaven. Do we need the Old Testament? If we don't understand that Jesus is God's plan from the beginning, from way back when, why would I believe that Jesus suddenly came down out of heaven and I should believe in him for salvation? If he's not a promise fulfilled, he's something that I might have invented. There's a lot that comes with knowing that God has had this plan from eternity. Please don't hear me saying that there's anything wrong with New Testament theology. I love New Testament theology. But along with it, guys, we have got to get to the point where we understand nobody ever lived that got saved that didn't get saved on that cross. When Jesus died, it was for everybody. Not everybody in the future, everybody. So that cross gets bigger, doesn't it? That plan of God becomes more inclusive. That plan becomes something that I should pay attention to. And now when I talk about falling short of the glory of God, now when I talk about me not living up to God's glory, the glory that I was supposed to have because I'm created in his image, I can ask almost anybody. I don't have to say the word sin, but if I ask them, are you as glorious as God? There aren't very many out there who would say yes to that. Are you living up to the image of God in which you were created? If they will admit that they're not as glorious as God, then I can start to say to them, maybe that's because of what Genesis says about our sin. The reason that we have to talk about sin, friend, is this: my forebears have died. Death came as a result of sin. The world is full of sadness because of our sin toward each other. Sickness came. Death came because of sin. Sadness and sorrow and pain and heartache, all of the things that the world is full of, the strife that the world is full of, the barking back and forth at each other that the world is full of, all of it comes because all of us fall short of the glory that we should have as image bearers of God. If I can get somebody to agree with me that the world is a mess, and I can take responsibility for part of it, maybe they'll take responsibility too. Maybe we can agree together that we need an answer for this. We're sinners. We fall short of the glory of God. The moment Adam and Eve fell, what they fell from was the image of God in which they were created. They fell from the perfection that they had. They fell from what God intended them to be. all of us have fallen from where we should have been to where we are now. It's not easy to talk to people about sin. We don't like the idea that there's a judge. We don't like the idea that somebody can tell us we're wrong. We like to be autonomous. We'd rather sit on a seat beside God than sit in front of God's throne and be judged.
In the Old Testament, just trying to put myself in the Old Testament, the practice of the sacrifice of animals seems like to me that could be not necessarily the best symbol of the sacrifice of the lamb, but a stumbling block to seeing the future of the church.
The cornerstone,
Right.
we stumble over it, or it falls on us. There's a lot of ways we can go wrong. But
In fact, even the Pharisees were so locked into that they couldn't even see Christ.
yeah,
It's our nature to be that way
Yeah,
today,
yeah.
All of us.
absolutely. Yeah.
you know.
That's that's what's real.
Justified, we're living in the sanctification period
Yeah.
before glorification.
I've often wondered, I feel we live when it comes to salvation, we've had the luxury of having Christ going to the cross. We know that he died for us, and this has happened. Now think about the Old Testament saints. I always think about faith. What kind of assurance did they have, since they didn't have that luxury of having Christ already come? Somehow, some way, God must reveal to them that, I often wondered what was a part in their lives to know they had that assurance.
Yeah. That's exactly what I'm talking
For
about.
Abraham to take his son.
Yeah. But, just a common ordinary citizen, I'm just saying, somebody that wasn't
well, and I understand what you're saying. But if you were an Old Testament guy, you had to believe in a promise. Do you and I have promises? I believe Jesus saved me from my sins, but I still sin.
Yeah.
I believe Jesus saved me from my sins, but I live in a fallen world. Pete's dying from cancer. Cancer is a result of this fallen world. I live in a place where people bark at each other all day, every day. If you don't believe me, just turn your TV on. Turn to any news station you want. You'll bark, 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 bark.
Get on the highway and drive.
It's not hard to see that we live in a fallen world. So I've been saved from my sins, yet I still sin. I've been saved from my sins, and I'm going to die. I've been saved from my sins. So what? I mean, well, we have to have a so what, don't we? We have to have the promise for the future. Has Jesus come again? Is he sitting on a throne in Jerusalem? Is he ruling over me yet? Do I have a body that's, my body hurts when I wake up in the morning. How about you? I don't see as good as I used to see. I don't taste things as well as I used to taste them. If I walk too far, my knees hurt. If I lift too much, my shoulder hurts. My body's failing. But I have promises, don't I? I have a promise of a body that's going to be able to work all day, every day, and never feel the pain. I have a promise of a body whose vision won't fail, whose hearing won't fail, whose strength won't fail. And I'm trusting in a promise. That's exactly what the Old Testament guy had to believe in, was a promise. It's why the Old Testament tells us over and over again that that Abraham never saw what he hoped for. And it's why the New Testament tells us in Hebrews that Abraham and all the other saints never saw what they hoped for. It's telling us in its own gentle way that you don't get to see the end. you get a promise and you have to trust in that promise. Faith is what's important. Trusting the promise is what's important. Believing the promise is what matters.
That's the whole point of Habakkuk,
Exactly.
you know. I mean, Habakkuk says, Lord, what on the earth to do? He says, I'm not gonna tell you. You know, even if I did, you wouldn't understand. It's gonna work out and you won't be here when it does. So get up on the ramparts and watch.
Yeah.
And I want you to be astonished.
Yeah.
And, you know,
We get to
I get
know.
up on the ramparts and say, I don't even know how to watch. You know?
Is there any sunglasses or?
Yeah.
What am I
Throw in
watching?
the enemy, the attack,
Yeah.
our adversary, constantly calling into question what we're putting our faith in.
Yeah, I like what you said about the Old Testament, say looking for that promise, just like you just mentioned, how we know the Lord's coming. We have that promise, why he hasn't come. So that's very similar.
What we're going to see in Isaiah is that Isaiah sees the servant on the cross, but in the last part of the book, he also sees the anointed one. Hear what I'm saying when I say the anointed one. What he's talking about is the New Jerusalem in those last chapters. What he's talking about is the Jesus who comes back from heaven on the clouds of the sky. What he's talking about in the last chapters of Isaiah is the Jesus who sits on the throne in Jerusalem, who is there. He isn't anymore promised. He's talking about the Jesus who comes down and creates the New Jerusalem and then rules in the New Jerusalem. When we read these last 11 chapters of Isaiah, guys, you're going to think you're reading the book of Revelation. You're going to see the New Jerusalem come down out of heaven. You're going to see Jesus come back. You're going to see the anointed conqueror, the one who fulfills all the promises. Jesus fulfilled a lot of promises when he came. When he comes back, he will fulfill all of the promises. History will be over. It will all come to an end. God's plan has a beginning. That's why it says in the beginning, and it has an end. That's why there's a new beginning. The one we live in is in the middle. And we, like everybody else, have to trust what God says if we want to live in that new one that's coming. It's a glorious thing that Isaiah sees, because he sees the plan from the beginning. He sees that we need a king. He sees that God's going to provide that king. He sees that God's going to provide a righteous king. He sees that God's going to provide that king reigning over a righteous people. But then he gets real and he sends them to Babylon in captivity because they're not righteous. He sends them to Babylon in captivity because their kings have failed them. He sends them to captivity in Babylon because they didn't get it right. But he says, I'm going to rescue you. He says, I'm going to send Cyrus to send you back to the land. I'm going to send the servant to take care of your sin problem. If the king is coming and he's going to reign over righteous people, the sin problem has to get taken care of, doesn't it? It really does. I'm not ready. Bob Cole, the one sitting in front of you here today, I'm not ready for the New Jerusalem. I can't live under a righteous king right now, because right now that righteous king would have to deal with me and my sin and put an end to me. I'm not ready. But Isaiah says God's going to provide somebody to make me ready. Well, Jesus died on that cross for me, and I'm in the process, aren't I, of getting ready. God's doing it for me, in me, isn't he? I'm not doing it. I'm not perfecting myself. Am I? Trust me, I'm not. If you're wondering whether Bob's perfecting himself, Bob can't.
And your wife will testify to that.
My wife will be quite. You've been talking to her, huh?
The reason I said that is because my wife reminded me when she was with me, many times she would say, she'd look at me and say, Deke, honey, I just love you so, but you're such a hard study at times.
Yeah.
Um,
So salvation, we desperately need it. And that's what Isaiah is picturing for these Old Testament people. But he's not just picturing it for them. The glory of the book of Isaiah is he sees the servant on the cross, but he also sees what's coming beyond that. He sees the king on the throne. He sees the future promise for us fulfilled. He sees that you and I can trust. You and I can have faith. You and I can believe in the promises that are ahead for us. Is Isaiah relevant, guys? Isaiah says to me, 21st century Bob, that the promise that God has given me, it will be fulfilled. Is Isaiah relevant to me? Isaiah tells me that the promise that Jesus is coming back. Isaiah tells me, 21st century Bob, he says, yes, you should trust that. That promise will be fulfilled. I think that's relevant to me. I think that matters. The New Testament is full of that too. But if the Old Testament tells me that, there's no way I can let go of the Old Testament, is there? No way. So the whole world's called to sing a new song. I'm running out of time here, guys. The new song is always a response to a new realization or a new display of God's goodness. When they sing the new song in Revelation chapter 5, it's because suddenly they realize, suddenly they've got this realization that this lion from the tribe of Judah, this root of Jesse, this one who died as the lamb, this one can open the scroll. This one can provide what we need. This one is all that we needed. That's a reason for a new song. Finally, we get it. Finally, there's a new realization and a new song. It's glorious in Revelation chapter 5. It's beautiful, that new song. So here we're called to sing a new song. Psalm 33:3, sing to him a new song. Psalm 96:1, oh, sing to the Lord a new song. Psalm 98, oh, sing to the Lord a new song. Hear what we're learning from our big Bible, from the whole book as we look at it as a whole. I'm learning that God keeps doing new things. I'm learning that God stays at work. I'm learning that he continues to reveal himself over and over again. I'm learning that God reveals himself in new ways, day by day. Day by day, his mercies are new. Day by day, he does new things. Day by day, I ought to be ready to offer up a new song. The glorious picture the Bible paints of how I ought to watch, how I ought to wait, who I ought to be in the midst of the fallen world that I live in. If he's got new mercies for me in the midst of my fallen world today, and I sing a new song, is that world going to notice? What's that bozo singing about? Is what the world around me is going to say. But if I'm prepared then to give an answer for my hope, maybe I have a chance to talk to him, don't I? So the new song here responds to the new thing back in verse 9, back in the servant song. Remember it said, I've told them about old things, now I'm going to do new things. That's in the servant song. And so the new song is a response to the new thing. The conqueror who brought worldwide terror, this is the conqueror who's going to send them back to their land. We don't know his name yet, and we don't know much about him, but in chapter 41, it's announced that there's a conqueror coming that the world's going to be afraid of. We're going to learn later on his name is Cyrus. And so when he comes, the picture is of worldwide terror and a flight to idols. The servant provokes instead an outburst of song and a turning to the Lord. The Lord has argued all along that you might better have a living Lord than an idol that you have to nail down so he doesn't fall over. If you got to nail him down, if you got to carry him wherever he needs to go, if you got to carve him into existence, I'm not sure how valuable he really is. So even creation sings in praise as all of creation is brought into relationship with the Lord because of the servant. The servant is going to deal with all of sin in all of time. And so creation will get redeemed. The bondage of corruption is going to be over, and creation's groaning turns to singing. Read Romans 8, verses 19 and following. When creation delights because of the work of the servant. The bondage of corruption is going to be over. Verse 11 refers to Israel's neighbors. When it talks about Salah and Kedar, these are Edomite cities. Even Edom will sing because of the work of the servant. If you remember Edom from back in those, the first part of the book, and there's that big array of oracles, Edom was the one country that just couldn't be saved. But in the end, even Edom will recognize the work of the servant and sing because of it. Here, Philippians chapter 2, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. Even Edom, the nation that can't and won't be saved. Even Edom, every knee, every tongue. When he comes back, when he sits in Jerusalem, when he reigns and puts an end to sin and evil and death and corruption and tears and pain and sorrow and sadness and death, when it's all gone, every knee will recognize who has done that. Every knee will bow. Every tongue will confess. You better confess now, because if you haven't confessed until then it will be too late. But every tongue will confess. Every tongue will confess. Every knee will recognize when the King comes. That's a glorious King. Maybe
What you're saying basically is that you're also going to be how wrong you were.
yeah. Remember last week when Ted said his response to the big picture of the book of Isaiah is that we better get it now. Time is limited. That's exactly right. In the end, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. But you better do that before the end, because if you wait till then, it's too late. There's a lot in what Ted said that Isaiah tells us the time is now. You better get it now. Don't wait. So, Acts of the Lord, verses 13 through 17. I know. I'm running out of time. The bell is
What
ringing.
that is?
I'm retired.
The acts of the Lord. The Lord goes out like a mighty man, like a man of war. He stirs up his zeal. He cries out. He shouts aloud. He shows himself mighty against his foes. That's verse 13. Mighty man. The Lord goes out like a mighty man. That's a Gibor. Remember David's mighty men? They were Giborim. It's the same word. Giborim is the plural of Gibor, mighty man. So the Lord goes out like David's mighty men. When David's mighty men went out, they got the job done. They always got the job done. And he shows himself mighty against his foes. Again, that same word, Gibor. When the Lord goes out, he is going to go out and he stirs up his zeal. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish it. That's this new king that's going to come. Remember Isaiah telling us about the new king, the wonderful counselor, the almighty God, all of that, and the zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish it. Lord's going to stir up his zeal. He cries out, he shouts aloud. This is a mighty God. This is a mighty king that's going to accomplish all of this. And so that's how we get introduced to these middle verses. And you see in verse 14, for a long time I have held my peace. And so now this mighty one is speaking. These verses in the middle, 14, 15, and 16, they are the Lord himself speaking. If you've got just a few minutes, I'll try to go really quick through this and we'll talk about it. So he says, for a long time I have held my peace. I've kept still and restrained myself. Now I will cry out like a woman in labor. I will gasp and pant. Long time, that translation is from eternity. That is adolam, from eternity. For a long time, I have held my peace. God is saying, I have kept this as my mystery. This is the New Testament talks about it as a mystery, and now the mystery has been revealed. For a long time, I have kept silent. For a long time, you didn't know what was coming. I've talked to you about this thing that God had to do, but you didn't know what it was. For a long time, it's been like that. I've kept still and restrained myself, the Lord says. But now, that's a different, isn't it? That's a new thing. But now, but the Lord, but now I will cry out like a woman in labor. I will gasp and pant. God's like a woman in labor. In this case, the child is the new things that are about to appear, the servant's work. The Lord's plan from eternity has been to bring about the work of the servant. Now the time is about to come. Cry out, gasp, and pant, indicate that the time of labor has come. The pregnancy, the long pregnancy is over, and now it's time for labor. Now the birth has come. The 800 years between when Isaiah gives this and when the servant comes, that's the labor, guys. That's from eternity. God has been quiet, but now for 800 years, he's going to bring forth this work of the servant. Well, I'm glad my wife wasn't in labor 800 years. But when you compare it to eternity, it's nothing. A day is like 1,000 years, right? This is only 800 years.
Is this the difference in Christ coming as the judge and Christ coming as the servant? Is that the contrast?
Absolutely. The servant comes to make us just. When he comes back,
It's the judge. And this is the nature difference between the two individuals.
yeah, this is why why we get the servant and the anointed one.
Okay.
Those two
The anointed
pictures
one.
are very, very different.
Anointed one is different.
Yeah, he's
Different character.
yeah, the anointed one. The servant suffers, the anointed one rules. And that's with a capital R, guys. That's judges with a capital J, is in control with a capital I. This anointed one, when he comes back, Satan is going to be thrown away. He's got that power. Evil's done. That anointed one, he's different than the servant. Though they're the same person. So he says, I will lay waste mountains and hills and dry up all their vegetation. I will turn rivers into islands and dry up the pools. It's a picture of destruction, isn't it? Contrast between mountains and rivers, between food and water, and between rivers and islands. And this Isaiah's words are so clever. Rivers is water bounded by land, and islands is land bounded by water. And he contrasts the two. I mean, he's just, the poetry of the book of Isaiah is beyond imagination. You just can't, as you start to see how intricate it is, And it's way more than what I can tell you about when we talk about this week by week. This poetry is unbelievable, guys. There's no way that Isaiah did this. This is God telling us through Isaiah's pen. So, and I will lead the blind in a way they do not know, in paths they've not known. I will guide them. I will turn the darkness before them into light, the rough places into level ground. These are the things I do, and I do not forsake them. Now the destroyer becomes the rescuer. He destroyed in the verse before. Now he's going to lead the blind. He's going to rescue them. His salvation is as just as his wrath. The salvation that God provides has to be just. And the only way he can save us and be just is to punish, to turn loose his wrath on our sin. And the only way he could be just and save us is to do that, to turn loose his wrath. And so he did what only God could do. He turned it loose on himself. It's absolute justice. And so when he is just and the one who justifies, he is just because he has suffered the wrath, the just wrath of God that has been loosed on our sin. All of the wrath of God against all of sin for eternity was turned loose on the guy that was nailed to that cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? The one that said those words was the one who had lived in perfect fellowship with God forever. Was it just? No way. What God did to Jesus on that cross was just. But the Lord saw what was ahead of that. And for the joy set before him, he endured it, the injustice. And so he set a model, didn't he, of humility and being willing to die that others might be saved. According to verse 7, ministry to the blind was the work of the servant. Now it is the work of the Lord himself. Remember, it's the Lord who's speaking here. This is the same ambivalence as between the king and the Lord in chapters 1 through 37. This servant does the work of the Lord. This servant does the work that only the Lord can do. So who must this servant be? Unto us a child is born, and to us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. This child, this son that's given is going to be the mighty God. Well, if he's the mighty God, then this son who's born for us, among us, is God. This servant who will die for us does the work that only God can do. Who must he be? He must be God. We're going to find out the same things about the anointed one. He must be God. Only God can do these things. Wow. The ministry includes overcoming personal weakness. He's going to lead them in a way they do not know. He's going to remove barriers, turn darkness into light, rough places into level ground. And it says at the end, I do and I do not forsake. Those are prophetic perfects, and that's old time language. What it means is that the prophet is announcing that this is sure because God has said it. It's as sure as if it's already done because God has said it. So, verse 17, they are turned back and utterly put to shame who trust in carved idols, who say to metal images, you are our gods. If you look at this ministry that's going to take place, of the judgment that comes and of the rescue that comes, that follows it. And suddenly you've got these people that want to trust in idols. They just simply are going to be turned back and put to shame. People who want to trust those idols. How foolish is it if God's the judge and if God's the one who saves? How foolish is it to trust in an idol? It's just nonsense. And that's what this verse says, means to say. That's what God is saying to us in this verse. He's saying, if you think you're going to turn to an idol, if you think that this judge and this salvation, you're going to look at that and turn instead to an idol, this verse means to say to you, you're an idiot. Sorry, it's just what it says. You're going to be put to shame. You're a nutmeg. You're just like the one who in the Garden of Eden trusted the serpent. You're a fool. That's what it says. So some are led to safety, some are not. Those who trust in the idols are going to be put to shame. Those who cling to the idols, their choice is going to lead inevitably to tragedy. And so we have a Lord who comes to judge and to save, and we have idols. The one that's going to be the judge and save, and we've got the one you had to nail down so it didn't fall over when you slammed the door. We got the one that comes and goes as he pleases, who lives and provides moment by moment for the universe that he's created. And you got the one that you've got to carve if he's going to have any existence at all. Which one are you going to choose? That verse 13 says, if you're choosing the one you got to nail down, you really need to think again. So I used up an awful lot of time this morning, guys. What do we learn from it as we lift up our faces now from Scripture? How do we look differently at the world that we see around us?
We should be in awe that God would choose us to reveal these truths.
Yeah.
Because we're the ones that worship the idols. We're the ones that worship idols.
We did.
We did.
And
And you know what happens? When Mike Dimitri wants to do it, Mike Dimitri wants to do it. Even in my thoughts, I need the Holy Spirit. And he abides in me when I'm mindful of it.
Is God still on the throne? Does this say God's still on the throne? This fallenness that we live in the midst of, and
The problem is you end up with idols that you don't even know are idols.
Yeah.
It depends on what you think.
And things in and of themselves aren't necessarily
It's
wrong.
on your mind, so forth
Yeah.
and so on. All of a sudden you think, I shouldn't be thinking that. Bingo.
yeah.
And in the world I live in, there's not much I can think about, but that's not going to end up bothering me. So anyway,
You got the sin of commission and the sin of omission.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
But we do have a Lord that has promises for us. And trust me, if you've trusted what Jesus did at the cross, one day you're going to stand face to face with Jesus and be like him.
And what Paul said, he was anxious.
Yeah.
He's anxious.
Even so, come, Lord Jesus.
If you got something you want me to do, this could be our last opportunity to do something in this realm.
It's stunning what he has done and what he has promised for us. It's stunning that people want to trust in something else, or it's stunning to me that people want to look God in the face and say, no, I'll decide who I am, what I am, and I'll be in charge of what's right and wrong in my life, and I'll have my truth, and you go ahead, God, and have your truth if you want, but here's my truth. This is the God who created them the ones who say that. This is the God who continues to provide breath every day for them. This is the God who wants to redeem them and works actively in their lives to redeem them. Thank God that he worked in my heart and turned me into someone who would respond. Because I sure didn't do that. I wasn't looking for God. Humbling, isn't it?
We used to have a man in our church that was a physicist. Yeah, he did a study of the prophecies being fulfilled and what were the odds that it would happen by random act. And it was something like 1 in 28 billion or something. Rationalist reason for believing.
Yeah.
There's no way that all those prophecies could have been fulfilled by chance. And, I always remember that.
Who wants to pray?